She never imagined a zombie outbreak would actually happen. It all started when things took a weird turn. She noticed a strange update on her agent's feed. He had posted a video of Tiantong Yuan. Near the subway station at Changgang Hospital, long yellow police lines had cordoned off the entrance. When she opened it, his thick regional accent blared through the speaker. Man, what on earth is happening at Changgang? The police are here, and so are hazmat suits. Sitting on the subway, she commented, asking if it was a confirmed case. But when she refreshed the page, the post was gone. Right then, a message from the agent popped up. He had sent a voice note. She quickly put on her headphones. Another message followed. Hey, I was just about to reply, but why is the post gone? I did not delete it. Not sure if it is a confirmed case, but there are SWAT officers. It looks pretty terrifying. By the way, your lease is expiring soon. Ready to renew? She frowned at the screen. Honestly, she had not made up her mind yet. The apartment layout in Tiantongyuan was great. The area had everything she needed, and it was cheap. But the sheer crowd there was overwhelming. The brutal 8 a.m. subway commute left her completely exhausted. But actually moving out, finding a place, and packing, along with paying a heavy deposit and rent up front, felt like way too much trouble. While she hesitated, a third voice note from the agent arrived. This time it was a 59-second long message. Just seeing that length gave her a headache. The first half was just him explaining that since it was July, college graduates were flooding the market, so she needed to sign quickly to keep the discount. But the second half sounded completely wrong. Without any warning, a muffled, agonizing scream echoed in the background. The agent cursed loudly, muttering in confusion, "What on earth is that?" Then came a wave of pure static. Crackling noises filled the feed until a final, massive crash. Even though her headphone volume was not turned up high, that sudden, deafening sound made her jump. A sudden blast made his ears ring. Pulling off his headphones, he squeezed through the crowd to the window, looking toward the hospital. But the train was already speeding to the next station. He couldn't see a thing. The text he sent the agent about needing time still hadn't received a reply. A faint sense of unease crept into his chest. At the office, only half the staff had shown up. Everyone was gossiping about a celebrity's statement from yesterday. No one seemed to know that near Tiantongyuan, there were rumors of an outbreak. The morning's horrific screams and loud crash still had his heart pounding with dread. He couldn't resist. He texted a coworker who also lived in Tiantongyuan. The reply came almost instantly. "Get out now. The city is locking down." His chest tightened as his panic grew even stronger. Too panicked to type, he dialed the number directly. It rang once and picked up. In the background, airport boarding announcements blared. Before he could speak, his coworker lowered his voice, speaking incredibly fast. "Tomorrow at 8, Fengcheng locks down. Leave if you can. Stockpile everything." Then, the line went dead. Next came a video message from him. It was footage from Changgang Hospital. The camera panned past the ER entrance and zoomed deep into the emergency room. A man in a hospital gown was pinned down by 4 people. He broke free for a second before being tackled again. But in that split second, one of their arms was bitten, a huge chunk of flesh torn away, bleeding heavily. 30 seconds later, the restrained man collapsed. Seizing, the video cut to black. An unspeakable panic slammed into his chest like a heavy fist. He had never been one to believe online videos, but right now, his mind could only think of one horrifying word. He bolted upright, drawing startled stares from his coworkers. She kept her head down, telling her boss a family emergency came up. Her boss was caught completely off guard. He probably assumed the worst and urged her to rush home. He gave her a full week off, shaking off the wild, unrealistic thoughts in her head. She quickly called a rideshare on her phone. While waiting for the car, she called her dad. She urgently told him to drive back to City Q immediately. She was heading home today. Her dad worked at a company based 400 kilometers away in nearby City H. Even though it was only Monday, his precious daughter was coming home. Her father was incredibly doting and would rush to the airport without a second thought. Still, over the phone, he was still a bit confused by her sudden decision to return. Her rideshare was about to arrive. She really did not have time to explain everything now. She promised that once she got out of the car, she would call him right back and explain everything. The second ring road was more congested than usual today. Even the driver was sighing heavily in frustration. But she, consumed by thoughts of the video, kept anxiously looking back through the rear window. She felt incredibly unsafe, but she knew that panicking would change absolutely nothing. Taking a few deep breaths, she opened a travel app with trembling hands, searching for flights to City Q. The earliest available flight out would depart from the capital airport at 2:40 in the afternoon, and there was only one seat left. It cost over 2,000 yuan. Without even blinking an eye, she booked the ticket and paid for it instantly. Immediately after that, she called her mother's phone. Just last October, her family had bought a brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment in City Q. Since it was a new development, progress was slow. The entire renovation process was only finished this April. But since April, constant pandemic outbreaks had kept her away. Going back would mean a strict 14-day quarantine, so the trip to finally see their new home had to be delayed. The phone connected, but before her mother could speak, she secured the address of her family's new house first. Then she insisted her dad leave work immediately. She was arriving home that very afternoon, but her mom flat out refused over the phone. Her father was an incredibly rational chemist. If she randomly disrupted his work like this, without even offering a decent reason, he would never buy it. But she was his daughter, after all. She claimed she bought tons of fresh food, demanding he cook her favorite pork ribs tonight. If they sat out, they would spoil, and everything would be ruined. He immediately nagged her about wasting money while walking out early. Then, the line went dead. Finally, her car broke free of the heavy traffic and merged onto the main highway. But even the highway was packed, looking exactly like peak rush hour. She wondered if these drivers had heard rumors too, desperately fleeing the city just like her. With time slipping away, she opened her delivery app and entered the new address, planning to order from the nearest grocery store. Q City was just a tiny, remote town with only a few major supermarkets in total, like Hema, RT Mart, and Walmart. Even those had only 2 locations citywide, scattered far apart in different districts. As she tried placing an order directly, she suddenly realized the catch. There were absolutely no major supermarkets near her. Her heart sank instantly. Searching through a local delivery app, she finally spotted a decent convenience store. Living away, she had always relied on takeout, so she had no clue what cooking oil to buy. This frantic shopping spree finally taught her the real cost of living. She avoided buying meat from this shop, though. The convenience store's markups were insane, and the quality was highly questionable. It was better to hit the wholesale market with her parents. The final bill cost her over 20,000 yuan. By then, her car had already reached the neighborhood. He wanted to pay quickly to secure this first batch of supplies. Just as he stepped out of his car, the supermarket owner called him about his order. After repeatedly making sure there was no mistake, the owner hung up, still sounding skeptical. He looked down at the delivery address. Golden Jade Apartments, Building 12, Unit 1, basement level. He couldn't help but praise his own cleverness. He knew this massive panic buying order would definitely raise suspicion, so he intentionally avoided his actual apartment on the 16th floor. He would rather carry the heavy supplies himself than leave a trail back to his safe house. Staring at the endless list of secured resources, he finally felt a moment of relief. Even though he had no idea what was coming, he refused to let his guard down just because. He escaped the city earlier that afternoon. Instead, he braced himself for the absolute worst. What was really going on with those rabid patients in the video? A massive metropolis of tens of millions, a global transit hub, and it was collapsing into total chaos. Why did the country's most vital economic center become the first place people fled from? Was it completely out of control? What was happening to the world? Once he was safely back in his rented bedroom, he initiated a video call with his family group. His dad answered instantly. Computer already packed up, just waiting for this call before heading out. His mom took a few rings to pick up, her hands still wet from washing vegetables in the kitchen. The moment he saw their familiar faces, his composure completely shattered. His voice trembled so violently he couldn't speak. He had never been a strong person, and the terrifying truth of the apocalypse was simply too heavy to bear alone. He hesitated, terrified they would just laugh it off. His dad's brow instantly furrowed with worry. "What is it, son? Did something happen?" His mom turned off the kitchen faucet immediately. After a brief, tense silence, she spoke. "Sweetheart, does this have to do with your sudden return?" She nodded. She knew there was no time to waste. She fought to keep her voice from shaking, before finally managing to speak. She told them she had no idea what was going on, but she knew it was incredibly serious. The city was going to be locked down tomorrow at 8. Someone had warned her to run and stockpile supplies. She was absolutely terrified, begging her parents to believe her and buy everything they could. They needed at least a year's worth of food. Her father suddenly spoke up. He told her not to fear, saying they had her back. Her mother tried her best to act completely unfazed, but her furrowed brow completely gave her away. She asked who else they would believe if not her. She took a deep breath and untied her apron. If it was stockpiling they needed, she told her to forget about cooking today. She was heading straight to the wholesale market first. She told her daughter to send over her order list so she could check what she had missed and fill in the gaps. Her father stood up and lit a cigarette. He promised to buy supplies in H City and bring them back. He assured her their family would be completely fine. He told her not to worry and to just pack her things. He urged her to get to the airport without delay. Feeling her family's absolute trust, a wave of warmth rushed through her. And she quickly said she had already ordered a huge batch of supplies. Because she didn't want to draw any unwanted attention, she had them sent to the first-floor garage. They were scheduled to arrive around 8 tonight. She warned them that when they carried everything upstairs, they had to make sure they didn't run into anyone. Her mother grabbed her car keys, ready to rush out. Her mother told her not to worry. She asked if she forgot how. Before every winter when she was little, the family would stockpile hundreds of pounds of cabbage. She told her to put her mind completely at ease. She promised she would never let her get hurt. She nodded and hung up the call, desperately trying to stop her arms and legs from shaking. He began packing his things in the rental apartment. The items he actually needed to take from the place were actually pretty few. His family already had all the cookware and bedding. He ended up packing only 2 large suitcases of clothes, plus his computer and stockpiled medicine. As for food, he decided to leave it all behind. His flight was scheduled for 2:40 in the afternoon, yet he still headed out by 11 o'clock. The drive to the airport usually takes 30 minutes. But looking at the state of things today, he opened his navigation app to check the highway. The entire route was jammed a dark, angry. Grabbing his suitcases, he immediately bolted for the subway. The platform was more packed than the morning rush hour. Lugging his heavy bags, he desperately shoved into the crowd. He barely managed to squeeze inside. Instantly, the suffocating stench of sweat nearly made him gag. A sudden, dark premonition hit him right then. Way more people knew about the lockdown than he imagined. And he was right. As the massive steel train screeched to its third stop at Lishuiqiao South, not a single soul could fit inside anymore. People inside the car were pressed tightly shoulder to shoulder, packed so closely they were standing heel to heel. He strained to peer through the window at the highway. The sea of cars below stretched from one end, all the way to the horizon, completely frozen, like sitting ducks on a chopping board, completely helpless. Some desperate drivers were already abandoning their cars to walk. His heart began to sink as panic crept in. With every single station the subway passed, his anxiety spiked, his chest pounding harder. He was terrified the train would stall halfway and leave them trapped in the endless dark. When they finally arrived at Beijingqiao Station, he grabbed his suitcases and bolted for the exit. A massive wave of people flooded out of the subway. He rushed ahead to claim a spot on the escalator, while the rest of the frantic crowd scrambled to fight for the elevators in the distance. But there were simply too many people fighting for a lift. They filled instantly and shot straight to the top. Those left behind in the elevator rush hesitated for a second before sprinting right toward him. Gritting his teeth, he tensed his arms, lifted both suitcases, and started dragging them up, step by step. By the time he reached the airport express, the train doors were already beeping, about to close. He hurled one of his suitcases inside, left the second on the platform, and bolted forward. And at the very last second, with his clothes caught in the door, he squeezed inside. The airport line's AC was freezing, colder than line 5. Instantly, he broke out into a cold sweat. His suitcase slammed hard against the metal handrail, leaving a deep dent right on the surface. A kind stranger picked up the other bag and handed it over to him. He quickly muttered his thanks, only now feeling the sharp pain in his palms. He looked down and saw his hands were swollen from the friction. A dark, bruised red spread all the way to his fingertips. He quickly gripped the icy metal subway pole, using the cold to numb the painful swelling. The carriage was dead silent, yet far from quiet. The frantic sound of tapping screens filled the air. Everyone was texting furiously, so he quickly sent a quick update to his family group chat. Then, he opened his social media feed. After a 3-second startup ad, he was about to search for breaking keywords to see what was happening, but his homepage automatically refreshed. The official transit account he followed popped up. A new post had been uploaded just a minute ago. Travel notice. Due to emergency high-speed traffic control, on July 18, 2022, from 11:40 p.m. until the last train, the Capital Airport line will suspend all service. The speeding train howled sharply as it sliced through the compressed air. That screeching noise made his skin crawl. With goosebumps breaking out and his nerves jumping frantically, he realized one thing clearly. This was the absolute last train to the airport. And even worse news was just around the corner. He braced himself and started searching the word lockdown, along with Chenggang Hospital and Tiantong Yuan. But every search result on Weibo had been wiped clean. It was a classic, dead giveaway cover-up, and the censors knew exactly how to play it. Next, he hesitated for only a second before typing the one word he feared most: zombies. Just as the arrival chime rang out, his account got completely banned. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with his arm, grabbed his suitcase, and stood up. Rushed out of the train along with the crowd. Every passenger around him maintained a tense, unspoken silence. His hand holding the heavy suitcase was burning with pain, but he had no time to care about that. Right now, the sheer shock in his mind was far more intense than any physical pain. A massive surge of adrenaline made his ears ring. The truth was simply too terrifying to face. Once inside the airport, security checks got incredibly strict. They needed to show a green health code, a negative test from within 48 hours, and then be pulled aside by airport staff to write down every single place they had visited. The sweat stinging his eyes made them burn with a sharp, stinging pain. The woman supervising him handed him a tissue. As he wiped his face, he caught a glimpse of the paper under her arm. He could faintly make out the name Chang Geng. His heart immediately leaped into his throat. He carefully wrote down his office address, his home address, and any public places he had recently visited. Finally, his pen hovered over the line for his current residential address. A moment later, he handed in the completed form. She carefully reviewed every line of his form and then glanced down at the suitcase he was clutching so tightly. She asked him a few quick questions and let him through, but the others were not nearly as lucky. Several people behind him, for some unknown reasons, were barred from boarding the flight. Armed police and guards in hazmat suits pinned them down and dragged them away. Fortunately, the security check went smoothly for her. Even the lines were surprisingly short. She finally took a seat at gate 43. She could finally breathe a small sigh of relief. After all, she arrived at the airport 2 hours early. With only a few scattered people around, she found a quiet spot and called her mother right away. Her dad was likely driving and couldn't be distracted. The phone rang repeatedly before her mother finally answered. The background was incredibly loud and chaotic. Her mother was speaking at a rapid-fire pace. She vaguely caught words like chickens and frozen meat. Once she finished yelling orders, she finally addressed her. "Dabao, Mom is incredibly busy over here. Just ordered 200 pounds of pork, 100 of beef, 100 pounds of mutton, and 4 chickens. What else do we need? No chicken wings or drumsticks yet. Want anything else?" She was absolutely stunned by Miss Zhao's sheer efficiency. She had only meant to remind her to stockpile some meat. Now, she had to quickly pivot and instruct her. "Remember to buy solar generators and backup batteries, and buy a few more refrigerators. I'll search Baidu for anything else we might need." Since time was incredibly tight, and she had been on high alert, her brain had completely frozen up. Hanging up, she scoured Baidu and Alipay and other platforms to compile a proper list. With 2 lists compiled, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She dropped the lists into their family group chat, and her mother replied almost instantly. Rolling her stiff neck from side to side, she looked up and out the window. The sky was a brilliant blue, a beautiful day that this city rarely saw. She silently hoped everything would go smoothly. Passengers traveling on Air China Flight CA111 to Q City. Please pay attention. Your scheduled flight is set to board in 15 minutes. Please gather your personal belongings and proceed to gate 43. The scattered passengers around her slowly began lining up. She noticed this flight was remarkably empty. He couldn't tell if they hadn't received the news, or if it was because of the sudden lockdown. But the moment the plane took off, he spotted a blind spot on the tarmac. Someone was on their knees, tearing into something. Right before vanishing from sight, the figure looked up. Their eyes locked for a brief, terrifying second, and those eyes were completely rotted out. The flight smoothed out, but his stomach was churning violently. That decaying zombie-like face from the takeoff kept replaying endlessly in his mind. He lowered the tray table in front of him, resting his head, desperately trying not to throw up. He had to hold it in. Vomiting now would draw attention. The grueling 2-hour flight dragged slowly on, spent in a miserable cycle of self-encouragement and dread. Stepping off the plane, breathing in the fresh air, finally eased the painful cramps in his stomach. But he wasn't the only one suffering there. An elderly man nearby had just stepped onto the tarmac, was violently throwing up. Seeing this, he immediately backed far away. After all, aside from the horrifying zombies, diseases like COVID and Mpox were massive threats, not to mention the constant danger of cholera. Before heading into the terminal, he cast one last look. Back at him, a few airport staff and concerned passengers were crowding around him. The man still hadn't finished vomiting. His spine was hunched over like the letter N, his throat rattling like a broken organ bellows, emitting a bizarre, raspy wheezing sound. His condition didn't look good at all. Once outside the airport, he immediately spotted his handsome dad. His father stepped forward to take the suitcase from his hands. In a world where everyone should be in absolute panic, the two of them shared a relieved, quiet smile. As the apocalypse loomed, he was just glad to be with family. Climbing into the car, he immediately noticed the back seat was packed completely full, stuffed with heavy hardware gear he didn't even recognize. His sense of security spiked once again. A child with a family is truly a treasure. Her father grabbed her suitcase, and tossed it into the trunk before climbing in. Dabao, we can't go home just yet. First, we need to stock up on supplies. Starting tomorrow, we aren't stepping foot outside. She nodded in immediate agreement, believing his plan couldn't be any more perfect. Pushing through today to buy all their supplies would ensure her family of 3 could live comfortably inside for a year. This would vastly improve their chances of survival. During that year, they could train indoors, building their strength while waiting for government rescue. If she were alone, she wouldn't worry, but the thought of her aging parents having to scavenge for supplies in the apocalypse made her wish she had superhuman strength to keep them safe under her protective wing. With that, she and her dad began their ultimate shopping spree. She was instantly stunned by her father's immense purchasing power. He bought things she never thought of, like steel wires and chains, along with heavy-duty combination locks and soundproofing foam. By the end, even she felt it was getting a bit extreme. Just before a local renovation market closed, her dad custom-ordered the strongest, blast-resistant glass and security doors available. The seller initially claimed installation would take 3 days, but her dad simply offered extra cash, and the shop owner instantly beamed with joy, agreeing to follow them home for an immediate installation. She barely got a word in the entire time, simply trailing behind her father to push the utility cart. As she watched the supplies pile higher and higher, her father was finally satisfied. He started up his SUV, driving the owner and installation crew straight to their apartment. Jingxiangyu was a brand new residential complex with slow handovers, so the occupancy rate was extremely low. Only about 10 families had actually moved in. The complex had 4 main gates in total, but since it was still mostly empty, only the main northern gate was currently open. The northern road was exceptionally wide and sat directly adjacent to their building 12. It was incredibly easy for the moving truck to pull in. It took them about half an hour to haul all of their new supplies upstairs. The moving crew worked fast and efficiently, and they quickly got the door sorted out. Meanwhile, she slipped away to call her mom, to see when she would be back. Her mother was currently at the mall, locked in a fierce bargain with a clothing vendor. The moment her phone rang, her mom answered immediately. She agreed to head home right away, since the vendor wouldn't budge on the price. She figured she could check the underground market tomorrow. Hearing that, the seller instantly admitted defeat. They gave in and told her to just take them. Her mom instantly beamed with joy. While the vendor bagged the clothes, she quickly asked her mom about the meat and solar generators they bought that day, wanting to know when they would be delivered. Her mother immediately lowered her voice. She explained that the wholesale market would pack the meat directly into the fridge before delivery. The appliance shop and the meat vendor were actually partners. As for the solar generators, they had already arrived. She had them placed right outside apartment 1502. She knew that empty unit well. Since it was still unfurnished, nobody would notice them. The rest of the items were left in the 20th floor stairwell. Nobody ever walked up that high anyway. Plus, there was no one living above the 20th floor. After hanging up, she first headed down to the 15th floor to inspect the solar generators. Then, she quietly climbed up to the 20th floor with her phone. Holding the checklist she had prepared, she double-checked all the delivered items: bottled water, toilet paper, instant hot pots, lime, water barrels, rainwater collectors, and rubbing alcohol had all arrived. But the sheer volume of supplies was overwhelming. Spanning from the 20th floor, the massive stockpile stretched all the way up to the 24th. Since she had brought outsiders in, having those supplies, just sitting in the stairwell made her a bit anxious. Fortunately, she had nothing else to handle, so she just sat in the stairwell, waiting for the workers. The construction crew finally packed up and left. He headed downstairs to get his dad to help move supplies. Buying the supplies was fun, but hauling them was brutal. He and his dad only managed to haul a quarter of it. Before his mom finally returned, he was carrying 3 heavy bags in each hand. Her hands were too full to help them out. They kept hauling non-stop until 9 when most of the supplies were finally moved. The online groceries he ordered had just arrived. The delivery driver dumped everything right by the entrance, right outside the first floor lobby. They realized they had a problem. The stuff upstairs could wait for now, but the pile downstairs was blocking the walkway and drawing way too much attention. So they grabbed their delivery handcarts and took the elevator down to the basement to start sorting the pile at the entrance. He felt dizzy and exhausted several times, but seeing the stash grow brought pure satisfaction. Eventually, they were completely wiped out. They each wolfed down a chocolate bar and jumped right back into the grind. By 11 o'clock that night, the meat and refrigerator his mom ordered finally arrived. Their building had private elevators and 2 units per floor, separated by a heavy fire door. They originally wanted the delivery sent next door to save trouble, but his mom had a bad feeling. A meat delivery in the middle of the night felt incredibly suspicious. Plus, their hallway and apartment were piled high with supplies. They absolutely could not let the delivery crew see, so his mom stayed cautious. She told them to deliver it across the street, right to the entrance of Building 10, Unit 2. The driver did not suspect a thing. He readily agreed, while his parents slipped out of Building 11's first floor and detoured over to Building 10, Unit 2. Coming out from inside that lobby, they used heavy carts to wheel the fridge home. He was not taking any breaks either. By the time this final run was done, they would need to rest their backs for a few days. He went back to Building B alone to bring the remaining supplies home. Finally, the family bustled until 2 in the morning, get all the ordered supplies inside. By his count, they had less than 6 hours left until reaching the Fengcheng Sanctuary. The neighborhood at night was eerily quiet. He was in no mood to sleep. The house was a total mess from the supplies, with barely any room to walk and chores piled high. While his parents were still tinkering with the solar generator, he slipped into the kitchen to make 3 bowls of noodles. Though he rarely cooked during his 2 years away from home, he had learned plenty from online video tutorials. As the saying goes, noodles welcome you home. He pulled out a 3-person portion of dried noodles. Once the water was boiling and bubbling, he quickly tossed the noodles inside. Then he took 3 large bowls from the cabinet, scooping a spoonful of lard into each one. He added green onions, a splash of light soy sauce, sesame oil, and a pinch of chicken powder and salt. As the noodles tumbled in the boiling water, he used a ladle to scoop up the boiling hot broth, pouring it directly over the seasonings. The savory steam rose, overwhelmingly teasing his taste buds. His stomach let out a loud growl. Once the rich seasonings in the bowl had fully merged with the hot broth, he turned off the stove and plated the noodles seamlessly. 3 bowls of homemade yangchun noodles were ready. He carried them out to the living room coffee table. His hungry parents immediately put down the pieces of the nearly finished solar generator. The 3 of them sat on the floor, devouring the hot bowls of noodles in a few bites. His dad even drained his bowl to the last drop, breaking into a warm, satisfied sweat. With that sudden warmth, the chill in their bones washed away, restoring their energy completely. They rested for a little while longer. They got back to managing their supplies. The 5-kilowatt solar generator was practically all set. As for the remaining bulky items, like the rainwater collectors and filters, they wouldn't be needing those just yet. Even though it was already July in Q City, the forecast for the next few days showed a sudden cold snap, with barely any rain on the way, so they decided to leave the useless equipment on the balcony. They would install them only when the time actually came. Next, his mom drew up a chores schedule. He and his mom were in charge of sorting food. His dad was put in charge of sorting tools. The non-urgent items could wait until tomorrow. Fortunately, their apartment was brand new. The study only had 1 large bookcase, without even a computer desk set up yet. This saved them tons of storage space. On top of that, the vacant guest bedroom only had a single double bed in it. Originally, the custom furniture for the other room was scheduled to arrive next month, just in time for his October holiday visit. But now, none of that mattered anymore. Since they didn't have to haul heavy furniture around, they sorted supplies until 5 in the morning. Everything was finally stored in place. They had completely crushed their goal, but their home was only 180 square meters. With so many supplies piled up, outside of the small lounge space he cleared in the living room, there was barely any room left to walk. The entire apartment looked like a massive warehouse. With only 2 hours left until the B-City lockdown, nobody felt like sleeping. His dad began mopping while his mom started germinating seeds. He busied himself feeding the 4 hens his mom brought home from the market last night. The 4 hens were kept on the kitchen balcony behind closed doors. That balcony was reserved just for the chickens, with soundproofing foam lining every corner. They even put an air purifier in there. Once the door was closed, they couldn't hear a single crow. The sun was already fully up. He found a moment to start filling the storage buckets. Then, he opened up his social media feed. He expected that opening the app would reveal some insider rumors. But as he scrolled down, yesterday, everyone's life seemed perfectly peaceful and quiet. Only a handful of people in his circle had their locations tagged in foreign countries, posting vague, cryptic rants that only an insider would understand. Right in the middle of all this peace, his family was gathered together, eating sandwiches his mother made. They were stuffed with a single fresh slice of tomato, a perfectly fried egg, and crispy bacon. With just 1 bite, the rich juices exploded in his mouth, making him feel drowsy. Then, a massive crash rang out. His heavy, drooping eyes flew wide open in sudden terror. Just as his slow brain could fully process what on earth was going on, a sharp, blood-curdling shriek pierced through the quiet neighborhood again. Desperate wails, impossible to tell if male or flooded into his ears like a desperate chorus. Throughout the compound, the few occupied windows began opening up one by one. Some people leaned over balconies to see what was happening. Others simply chose to draw their curtains shut and went straight back to sleep. Then, with the sudden sound of someone violently throwing up, the entire sleeping neighborhood was jolted completely awake. The sickening sound of teeth gnawing on bones echoed eerily through the empty complex. Someone was shouting frantically to call for help. Others began throwing heavy objects from high above, trying to crush the monster. He hid behind his curtains, staring intently, watching in absolute horror as a rotting thing devoured a body. Not far away, dozens of howling zombies were sprinting directly toward their location. He checked his phone, where urgent news alerts flooded the screen, announcing that 24 major cities were in complete lockdown. It was local B city time, July 19th. In the year 2022, 8:01 in the morning, zombies paced below their building, roaring without end. He was already regretting pulling that all-nighter, exhausted, sleepy, and running on fumes. Luckily, the neighborhood still had power and internet. Out of the 50 power banks they bought, only 10 had fully charged overnight, so he quickly swapped in 10 fresh ones. Meanwhile, his mother booted up her and started downloading classic movies and TV shows. His father silently chain-smoked 3 cigarettes before grabbing some steel wire from the study, along with a pair of heavy-duty pliers. He pressed against the security door, listening. We all know what he was planning. Zombies flooding the building was still unlikely, and looters had not yet emerged. Securing the fire doors on their floor today, with tight wire mesh, was their absolute safest move. The building elevators required keycards to operate, programmed only for specific floors. It would only stop where allowed. Total silence outside the door, but caution was their only lifeline now. After waiting a while, his father finally moved. He wanted to go alone, but his son refused to let him. He grabbed a kitchen knife and followed close behind. Together, they carefully pushed open the security door. The hallway was deathly quiet, leaving them to wonder if anyone else was still alive inside. Following a guide they found online, they twisted the wire into a military knot. If anyone tried to break in, no amount of force or clever picking could unravel it. It could only be undone from the inside. As for the corridor leading to the empty apartment next door, his mother insisted on sealing it too. If they were going to survive, they couldn't leave any weak spots. So he and his father locked down the opposite fire door. With a tight slip knot, he also went ahead and secured the door, connecting them to the neighbor with several locks. With that done, he headed back inside and wolfed down a piece of chocolate before beginning to observe the zombies wandering down below. But movies are just movies, after all. He couldn't simply rely on fictional stories to try and make an accurate assessment of the terrifying monsters currently lurking right below their building. The poor soul who was ripped to shreds earlier this morning had already joined the ranks of the growing zombie horde. Judging from this, the virus likely spreads through contact with saliva and blood. For now, the creatures downstairs did not seem to possess any real form of intelligence, merely wandering around in aimless random circles on the spot. Yet, they definitely reacted when that vomiting man threw up earlier today, instantly gathering together to swarm around Building 10 where that sick man was currently living. This proved hearing and sense of smell were likely the primary triggers for the zombies to attack. Fortunately, his own family's window curtains were incredibly thick, having been pulled tightly shut right after fixing the glass last night. They were completely sealed. Other neighbors in the area weren't nearly as lucky. A few homes only had thin, semi-transparent drapes hanging up, making everything they did inside completely visible to the outside. Once he finished observing them, he grabbed a notepad and pen to map out who was still living in their residential complex. First was Building 10, standing directly opposite his own window, which housed at least 3 families. In Unit 1, Apartment 702, was an elderly retired couple living inside. Over in Unit 3, Apartment 1201, was a college student who had returned home for summer break. That bit of detail came directly from his mother. As for Unit 4, Apartment 502, that was the home of the vomiting man, though the exact head count in that unit remained unclear. Next was Building 14, which was located right behind his own building. He spent the entire morning monitoring Building 14, staring so hard his eyes began to glaze over, but spotted absolutely no one. That was the occupancy status of those 2 buildings. That would have to do for now. Any new updates could wait until later. After letting out several massive his father suggested that the whole family go catch up on sleep. Now, as you and I know, sleeping deeply during an apocalypse with no guard, it sounded like a massive risk. But since they had prepared everything well in advance, and had securely locked all the stairwells earlier that morning, considering how things looked right then, they figured a good rest would be fine. With that, he drifted into a deep sleep, only to be jolted awake by a frantic pounding on the door. Opening his eyes, it was pitch black, but a foul stench hanging in the air instantly made him realize that something was terribly wrong. A putrid, metallic stench was so thick it felt like it would suffocate him. He covered his nose, only to gag from the rancid stench on his own hands. He fumbled around the pillow with his sticky, slimy fingers and finally grabbed his phone. By the weak, dim glow of the phone screen, his eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. And right there, less than 1 centimeter from his face, was the face of a highly decomposed, rotting zombie. Imagine locking eyes with that monster in the faint light. In that single second, from his head to his toes, his very soul shivered with pure terror. He recognized those terrifying eyes instantly. He had seen them at the lockdown airport just 1 day ago. Suddenly, with his mother, he managed to pull himself back to reality from the nightmare. That terrifying pair of eyes was nowhere to be seen, replaced by the soft, warm yellow glow of a small nightlight. But his limbs felt heavy as lead, completely devoid of any sensation. For a second, he actually feared the zombie, had already devoured his arms and legs while he slept. His mother took a cold, damp towel and gently placed it right onto his burning, feverish forehead. She slipped a few pills into his mouth and washed them down. As the warm water trickled down into his stomach, he finally realized just how swollen his throat was. Through his blurry vision, she spoon-fed him a few bites of porridge, but he had absolutely no appetite. After a few bites, he drifted right back to sleep. He slept for a whole day, waking up only to take medicine. His mother even gave him an alcohol sponge bath. By the time he finally woke up, it was the afternoon of the 20th. Once he woke up, he learned the truth. He had run a dangerously high fever all night. Working nonstop for 2 days straight had exhausted him, and the constant terror on the journey home didn't help, especially after pulling an all-nighter to secure supplies. With his absolutely pathetic physical stamina, he was the only one in the family to collapse. You wouldn't expect a young guy like him to handle the zombie apocalypse worse than his own parents, but he resolved to start training once he recovered. He couldn't afford to be this fragile anymore. Luckily, their family had fully stocked up on medicine, and his mother barely slept a wink. She kept using alcohol and cold towels to break his fever. That was the only reason he pulled through. Though his fever was gone, his throat was still raw, and the aftermath of that intense fever made his head feel like it was about to explode. After waking up, he dragged himself to wash his face, eating some of their homemade pickled garlic, an eggplant with a warm bowl of porridge. Finally, that terrible dizziness started to fade. Once his mother went to catch up on sleep, he began monitoring the zombies down below. A day had passed. Between Building 10 and Building 12, the zombie count remained unchanged. Still exactly 11 of them. This suggested that their residential area likely didn't have any new zombies. Now, we have to wonder if the previous pandemic left the residents with plenty of supplies stocked up. Plus, everyone had probably watched enough zombie movies to know not to go downstairs. These creatures, nobody knew what actually kept them functioning. Aside from hunting humans, they seemed to require absolutely zero food intake. Even the stray cats around the neighborhood didn't interest them. What was worse, they weren't afraid of daylight. The moment they heard a sound, they lunged to attack. Clearly, their sensitivity to sound was incredibly high. According to the news, the entire city was now under a massive lockdown. They blamed it on a mutant virus strain, claiming the risk of transmission was insanely high. That official explanation? He saw it coming from a mile away. He just wondered how many others were still kept in the dark. Over the next few days, the local zombies had absolutely nothing left to feed on. Their movements were no longer as agile as before. Finally, Building 14 showed signs of life. Unit 2. Room 1602 was directly opposite his place. As he scanned the area with his binoculars, he spotted a man taping a note to a window. He quickly called his dad over. They finally made out the 4 crooked, desperate words, begging for supplies. Whether to help him was a massive dilemma. While he was still debating what to do, the man across the way seemed to pass out from hunger. He slumped against the glass, completely motionless. His family of 3 held a quick, emergency family meeting. Maybe because the apocalypse had just started and society hadn't completely crumbled yet, a tiny seed of hope took root in their hearts, hoping the government would rescue them soon. Ultimately, the family agreed to help, but they couldn't give him too much. They knew better than to flaunt their supplies. In this wasteland, 2 packs of survival rations and 2 chocolate bars were enough to pull a dying man back from the brink. How long that would last him was his own problem. After all, they couldn't keep feeding him forever. In the apocalypse, human nature is highly unpredictable. Once the decision was made, he felt a massive weight lift off his chest. But getting the supplies to him was another story. His apartment was about 50 meters away from Building 14. There was no way they could throw it that far, but risking their lives to deliver it? Absolutely out of the question. Suddenly, some neighbor in his building happened to have a drone with 2 packs of instant noodles dangling from it, flew right past his eyes. Clearly, they weren't the only ones who noticed the distress call. A supply drop, but the pilot was clearly a complete amateur. The drone wobbled wildly, nearly losing its balance and crashing down. Somehow, it barely managed to land on a 16th floor windowsill across the way. The unconscious man was still slumped against the glass, but it was his companion, waiting nearby, who reached out and grabbed the supplies. The drone's loud hum attracted a pack of zombies. At first, they eagerly swarmed toward Building 14, but as the drone flew back, they followed it right under Building 12. The zombies' hearing had grown terrifyingly sharp. The drone's pilot seemed to live just a few floors below. Lately, things had been so quiet, he almost believed his family was the only one left in the building. The man who fainted from hunger finally woke up. Clutching his stomach, he weakly pulled the curtains shut. Building 14 fell silent again, like a pool of dead water. That night, it was his turn to keep watch. His parents had already gone to bed. He was trying to read, when a strange, creaking noise broke the silence. He switched off his nightlight and set the book down, straining his ears to pinpoint the source. As the bizarre noises continued, he slowly pressed his ear to the floor, but the sound suddenly vanished. Something was wrong. He froze in that position, lying flat on the floor for several minutes. Except for the steady ticking of the clock, it felt like he was entirely alone in the world. Deep down, he knew this was no time to lower his guard. Just as he prepared to wake his father, he stood up. A muffled, agonizing echoed from right beneath the balcony on his right. He shuddered, completely startled by the sound. He crept toward the window. He peeled back a corner of the curtain and peered down. Just diagonally below, on the 14th floor, the sudden violent shatter of glass pierced the air, sending shivers down his spine in the dead of night. A woman with a bloody, terrified face was being strangled by a pair of massive hands. Half her body was shoved out, dangling precariously in midair. Her flailing arms glinted strangely in the dark. Peering closer, he realized they were covered in shattered glass. Suddenly, her eyes widened in sheer horror. She had spotted him. Her mouth moved, but he couldn't read her lips. Yet, he understood the desperate message. And then, she was violently thrown out, crashing hard onto the pavement. Even in death, her head remained turned toward his window. Below, starving zombies shrieked and swarmed the body, tearing into the fresh, copper-smelling meat. A corner of the dark night was ripped open. The sudden commotion jarred several sleeping survivors awake. But in the shadows, a silent pact seemed to pass between everyone. Not a single light flicked on. He stood frozen, paralyzed with fear. His teeth chattered violently. But otherwise, not a single muscle in his body would obey him. Even his calves began to painfully cramp up. Clawing at the peeling wallpaper, he slid slowly to the floor. At that moment, a quiet sound echoed from below, the distinct crunch of footsteps on shattered glass. He picked up his phone, gripped so tight his palm hurt, and quietly switched on the rear camera, aiming it right through the curtain's gap. Directly toward that 14th floor room, a figure suddenly stepped into his screen. The man leaned halfway out of the shattered window, scanning the dark courtyard. His eyes swept casually toward his apartment, and stopped dead. He locked eyes with the killer through his screen. Just as his heart stopped, thinking he was spotted, the man finally looked away, turning his focus to the other apartments. A cold dread washed over him. This killer was far from finished tonight, plus he couldn't shake the feeling that the man looked familiar. At some point, his parents had woken up. They asked him what was going on. Seeing them, the truth hit him like a physical blow. He suddenly remembered exactly who this man was. Earlier that day, in Building 14, Room 1602, the one who took from his downstairs neighbor's 2 packs of instant noodles was this very man. The moment he realized the victim might be the neighbor who had given him those supplies, cold sweat began pouring down his face in sheer terror. Hearing his story, his parents instantly lost all desire to sleep. His dad was absolutely certain that those kind-hearted neighbors were the ones who were killed. Hearing this, his mother's hair stood completely on end. If those neighbors hadn't handed out supplies first, their family likely would have been the targets tonight. Trembling with horror, she spoke, "In this world, even kindness can get you brutally murdered." A heavy silence fell over the family. The bloody reality of this new world was now being brutally forced right in front of them. Never try to test human nature. Since the zombie outbreak began, this was the very first lesson the world taught them. The family knew deep down that they couldn't afford to drown in fear now. They had to stay completely and utterly alert to deal with this ruthless killer, because his target wasn't just the family downstairs. Now that he had infiltrated the 12th floor of Building 12, every single resident on the floor was now in extreme danger. How on earth did this killer get from Building 14 all the way over to Building 12? With so many zombies crawling downstairs, sneaking past them should have been an absolute impossibility. They hadn't tried to deliver supplies back then, precisely because they didn't know how to cross buildings. He felt like they were missing something crucial. He went back to his room and grabbed his observation notebook, realizing that since the day the outbreak began, no one in the neighborhood had gone outside, which highly likely meant no new zombies were created. The underground garage of their complex required a license plate scan for anyone to enter. Special vehicles got special treatment, so if no one had driven out lately, and no one let zombies inside the building, they likely couldn't enter the basement garage. And if the virus only spread through contact, the underground garage was clearly the safest place. The resident from Building 14 had likely realized this too, risking his life to slip in through there. But this was all just his speculation. If even one detail went wrong, his entire theory would fall apart. Crossing that garage was still incredibly risky. He would personally never risk his life on a gamble like that. The intruder was a total desperado. Ultimately, they agreed he should go get some sleep, while Mom kept watch, and Dad went to their fire door to reinforce it further. Now that their family was reunited, no one was going to break their fortress. The next day went exactly as expected. The man wasn't satisfied with just one apartment's loot and started searching floor by floor. He was incredibly cunning, heading straight to the top floor first, before slowly sweeping his way down. He knew no one lived above the 20th floor. Sure enough, he mapped out the upper levels by noon. They figured he didn't reach their door until late afternoon, but by 2:30 that afternoon, he already heard it. A faint, rustling sound. He had arrived. He pressed his ear against the security door, catching the faint scratching of a lockpick, along with the intruder's heavy, excited breathing. Man's muffled cursing lasted 10 minutes. His mother tried to cover his ears, but he just smiled and stepped away. The guy had no idea that before the world ended, he was a legendary online trash talker. If his hands weren't tied right now, that guy outside would be the one plugging his ears. But the tools he had clearly couldn't breach their family's heavily reinforced stairwell fire door. Even if he got past that, he'd still have to face the high-grade blast door installed right before the apocalypse. He peered out the window. Downstairs, the zombies had already heard the noise and were slowly gathering beneath his building. Tired of screaming curses, the man's voice finally faded. Staring down at the rotting horde below, a wild and crazy idea began to take shape. The dangerous thought hammered inside his chest, surging forth with an overwhelming rush of adrenaline. Who says being trapped inside means they are just lambs for the slaughter? His mother, once paralyzed with fear, is now completely ignoring the commotion. Before the angry man even left, she called him to the kitchen to prep dinner. Meanwhile, his father kept watch in the hall. They all knew they needed a full stomach to face trouble. In the kitchen, his main job was just helping out. Tonight, they were treating themselves to stewed ribs. First, they washed the ribs to drain the blood. While his mother wasn't looking, he funneled the bloody water into an empty plastic bottle. Next, the ribs went into cold water. Once the water boiled, he skimmed the rising foam off the top. He used chopsticks to pick the pieces up onto a plate. For now, the meat was just a plain, cooked color. Nothing special yet. But after days without meat, even unseasoned, his mouth was already watering. His mother heated the oil, tossing in garlic and ginger. As she tossed the meat in, splashing in soy sauce and wine to stir-fry, he slipped into the bathroom with the blood-filled bottle. By the time he came back, the ribs were beautifully browned. He added boiling water and covered the pot, simmering on high heat. The man outside finally grew tired. He spat out one last threat, cursing that they would pay dearly. He returned to the living room, trying to peer through the glass and catch a glimpse of the man. The next second, the man boldly showed up in room 1402. Spotting him, he threw a provocative glance and hurled an empty bottle. Naturally, the bottle didn't hit them. It didn't even reach the 15th floor. But his sudden, aggressive move still startled him. Having got a reaction, the man smirked disgustingly. Next, he flashed an incredibly insulting gesture. The words, "the dying woman mouthed yesterday," suddenly flashed across his mind. She had warned, "Run." He kept a straight face, pretending to be terrified. But behind his back, his fist clenched tight. This only made the man more excited. He tapped 2 fingers against his own eyes, before pointing them directly at him. He stared back one last time, then spun around to draw the curtains closed. Downstairs, hordes of zombies scrambled to tear into the plastic bottle that just fell. The empty bottle was quickly ripped apart into shredded plastic. They were starving. Fresh ribs came out of the pot, smelling divine. Just the scent alone made his mouth water. While other families choked down dry instant noodles, his family was about to feast on a perfect plate of ribs. He felt that he was reborn in this world, solely to eat this very meal. As steaming rice hit the table, his parents dug in. He couldn't wait either. He popped a tender rib into his mouth. No effort needed. The meat practically fell right off the bone. melt-in-your-mouth juicy, and seasoned to absolute perfection. He eagerly shoveled another massive bite of rice. Plump, glistening grains of white rice mixed together with tender, juicy meat. This single meal, if they had a mental stamina bar, it would be fully restored right now. They ended up eating a bowl and a half each, soaking the rice in rich, savory rib gravy. It was pure, blissful satisfaction. Afterward, his dad washed the dishes while he messed around with pre-downloaded music on his phone. The trash inside the house was piling up, starting to smell and attract tiny bugs. He suggested throwing some of it downstairs. His mom agreed that hoarding it was useless, so this was their only option. Littering from above wasn't a worry anymore. After all, nothing below was human anyway. He grabbed a bag of garbage and opened the window, locking eyes instantly with the guy from 1402. The man was staring at their apartment, plotting something. Seeing him, the neighbor flashed a creepy grin, showing off a row of rotting yellow teeth. He smiled right back. Before the creepy neighbor could sense trouble, he hefted the bag of disgusting bathroom trash, just like the empty bottle thrown at him, and hurled it straight at 1402. Though, this was slightly different from before. For starters, the neighbor threw an empty bottle, while he threw a bag bursting with garbage. He tossed upward, but he threw downward. Watching the man fume, covered in rotting waste, he offered a cheerful, mocking wave and said hi. Then, he slammed the window shut, drawing the curtains closed. The mission to enrage him was fully accomplished. Now came the trap. Slipping into the bathroom, he grabbed 2 bottles of raw rib, blood water, and while his parents were occupied, he slipped silently out the front door. The moment he stepped out, he heard the neighbor slam his door downstairs. He calculated the perfect timing, waiting for the guy to hit the stairwell, and quickly called the elevator. The elevator was still on its way up from the first floor, but the man had already beat him to his apartment stairs. This played right into his hands. He had originally worried the man would hijack the elevator on the 14th floor, but now, he was busy pounding on his 16th floor door. Ironically, this solved his biggest problem. As the elevator numbers ticked up, his adrenaline began to surge. His palms grew hot. Amidst the constant cursing and kicking, the elevator finally arrived. Clutching the water bottle, he crept forward. He slipped into the elevator without a sound. His chest ached from his violently pounding heart. He swiped his card immediately, selecting the first floor. The elevator descended smoothly. Just as he expected, the lobby door showed absolutely no signs of a break-in. For days, he had tracked the zombies below, keeping a precise record of their numbers. He had even checked them before heading down. Their numbers had only grown, never shrinking. This confirmed his theory about the undead. They had not yet breached the building. Besides, no one else had dared venture outside. Everyone had watched zombie movies. They knew the risks. No one wanted to be the first to die. What the killer in Building 14 could exploit, he could exploit too. The starving horde outside was completely ravenous. Anyone foolish enough to step outside would immediately be swarmed. They would be eaten alive before even turning. There was simply no coming back. He flung the first-floor fire door wide open, splashing the bloody water from his bottle inside. Then, holding the other bottle and his phone, he crept along the wall toward the lobby exit. The man's distant screams and pounding echoed faintly from above. The undead outside had not quite reached the lobby door, but they were closing in fast. First, he set the uncapped water bottle on the ground. Then, with absolute caution, he turned the lock. Click. The lobby door, the sound of it unlocking, cut through the silence of the residential complex. A few of the zombies turned and began shuffling slowly in his direction. He took a deep breath, pushing the door open, inch by inch. The creaking of the hinges drew the zombies' attention. They let out furious, wild snarls. Sweat beaded on the tip of his nose. He poured the open liquid down the door's gap. Then, he pulled out his phone. Before the growing horde could gather, he wedged the bottle right into the gap, blasting the festive tune he had downloaded earlier. He spun and bolted. Amidst the cheerful, festive music, the zombies were drawn by the blood and sound, fighting each other to squeeze inside. His hands shook, yet remained steady. He swiped his card, setting it for floor 16. As the doors closed, countless snarling zombies rushed him. Their sickening stench seeped through the closed doors, filling his nostrils and burning his throat. He grabbed the handrail, retching violently, dry heaving until his eyes were bloodshot. Clutching his stomach as the elevator reached 16, he collapsed desperately outside the doors. The killer was still screaming at the fire door, which now had a massive dent from his hammering. He took one last look at that fire door and quickly slipped back inside. Moments later, blood-curdling screams echoed through the building. His parents quickly realized what he had done. For the first time in over 20 years, his father's eyes welled with tears before him. He couldn't comprehend it. How his son found the courage to go downstairs alone, to face both the zombies and that killer. He understood even less why his child had to do something so dangerous instead of him. His father didn't blame him for his reckless actions, nor did he criticize him because of that dead man. There was no condemnation for what he did. He simply listened to the entire plan, then silently retreated to his room and shut the door. But that silence hurt him far more than any lecture. It was his mother's watch tonight, and he couldn't sleep. He slipped out of his room to talk with her. The stars over the neighborhood were incredibly bright. With human activity gone, the night sky was crystal clear. Knowing he had something to say, his mother just watched him. Under her quiet, intense gaze, the words died in his throat. Expressing love to one's family always seemed to be the hardest thing to do. Sweetheart, was your plan today really that foolproof? He opened his mouth, and a lie slipped right out. Of course, I'm not stupid. Why would I gamble with my own life? But as his mother stared, his confidence began to crumble. Deep down, he knew the plan was full of holes. If the zombies had caught him before the elevator closed, or if that man from outside and had gone back to the 14th floor and noticed the constantly moving elevator numbers, he would have been dead by now. His plan was high risk, high reward. That was why he never wanted them involved. Looking down at the zombies, his mother suddenly spoke. In your eyes, are your father and I supposed to hide behind you, relying on you for protection? He kept quiet, and she went on. Watching their child risk their life, just to keep them safe, is the absolute cruelest thing for parents. Did you ever stop to think? There were actually 2 people begging for food. Where's the other one now? Could he be lurking on the 14th floor, waiting to ambush you? This time, he was completely at a loss for words. He truly had not considered that possibility. Ever since that man slaughtered the family on the 14th floor, he had always assumed the killer was alone. Sweetheart, putting aside their roles as parents, he had to learn to cooperate with others. It was the first time his mother looked so serious. They were not a burden. His father stepped out of the room without anyone noticing. A month flew by in a flash. By late July, the water and power were cut off. At first, things were manageable, but as the days dragged on, more people were forced out to hunt for supplies. 13 people were officially registered in their household. In the end, only 5 actually returned. While everyone else starved and worried about water, he was living a surprisingly comfortable life. They had meat twice a week, and his mother made every meal a masterpiece. By late August, the whole city was starving. Their family only had 2 solar generators. To save precious power, they kept the air conditioning and fans off, relying purely on hand fans to cool down. During the day, he would stick to the shade, hiding from the scorching sun. During his night watch, an open window made things bearable. He endured this for another 2 weeks, just as his body adapted to the heat. Then, one September night, a massive rainstorm hit. It came out of nowhere, wild and relentless. In an instant, it felt like the sky collapsed. The deafening noise kept everyone awake. The heavy downpour finally stopped after 2 days, only to trigger a solid week of endless drizzle. Just as he started drinking ginger and brown sugar tea to soothe his aching knees, rain finally stopped. Northern drainage systems weren't built for this. They had never seen this kind of rainfall before. The non-stop deluge completely flooded the first floor, leaving the second floor in serious danger. He began to worry. Would the building collapse after being soaked so long? His mother assured him it was fine, saying water damage would only shorten its lifespan. Only then did he finally relax. All the zombies downstairs had vanished. Submerged in the water, nobody knew if they were dead or alive. On the second day after the rain stopped, someone grew impatient. They threw a pile of trash into the water first. The zombies did not react at all. Seeing that, the man built a crude wooden raft. He boldly set off to search for supplies. It was incredibly late by the time he returned. He brought back a whole raft of supplies. He was practically dancing with pure excitement. Together with the partner waiting to receive him, they spent over 10 minutes moving everything inside. 2 more days passed, and the submerged zombies still had not moved. Soon, more survivors gathered their courage to head out. By then, the water level had dropped quite a bit. The tops of the zombies' heads were now completely visible. The 5 survivors who had returned decided to risk it again, building individual rafts to head out. Meanwhile, his family was still living their own safe in their own little paradise. Until the zombies were gone and their supplies ran dry, they had absolutely no intention of leaving their self-built doomsday fortress. And besides, there were still zombies roaming the building that he had let in earlier. While the zombies outside were drowned under the water, the ones inside still clawed at his door from time to time. Night had already fallen by the time that group returned. The water downstairs had receded even further, exposing the zombies' heads entirely to the open air. With the water level so low, the wooden raft could barely support the massive weight of their supplies. They did not dare risk wading back through the water. So, they had to settle for bringing back fewer supplies. Under the dim lights, Eerie shadows flickered everywhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that the zombies were watching them. But it was only a feeling. After all, the zombies' eyeballs had already completely rotted away. Saying they were watching was scientifically impossible. Yet, the water, submerged undead, seemed somehow different from how they were before. The group quickly finished carrying their supplies, laughing and joking as they headed upstairs. The haul they brought back this time was only enough to last one person for 3 days. He figured they would have to head out again tomorrow, just as he had expected. Early the next morning, a massive crowd of survivors gathered in the courtyard garden. 11 people had joined the team this time. Each of them held a small bamboo raft, both men and women. Even the elderly couple from Building 10 had joined the group. His mother made some warm soup for breakfast. He grabbed a bowl and slipped out to the balcony, eating quietly while watching them through the curtains. By the time it was nearly 9:30, 2 more people arrived. A man and woman in matching athletic gear. They seemed to be the group leaders. The water had receded to the zombies' chests. After counting heads, they prepared to set out, but in a split second, chaos struck. The quiet zombies in the water suddenly erupted, charging the crowd with a terrifying, unseen speed. The leader reacted instantly, slicing off the lead zombie's head, but the others were not so lucky. The elderly couple was the first to fall. Soon, a lightning-fast zombie tackled the male leader, pinning him straight to the ground. Then 5, 7, 10 more fell, 13 of them in total. The garden transformed into a bloody slaughterhouse. Blood from the horrific mauling, mixed with the murky, filthy floodwater. Silence returned to the neighborhood, as if absolutely nothing had happened. Only the thick, metallic stench of blood made him feel like he was suffocating. The scattered remains of the dead floated listlessly in the sewage. Rotten weeds in the empty courtyard stood like grave markers witnessing the slaughter. As the wind blew, he suddenly noticed something chilling. The zombies were all staring in one direction. Following their collective gaze, he saw a massive hulking zombie. Its eyes lacked the blank stare of ordinary monsters. The rest of the zombies crowded around their leader, heading into the garden. It looked as if he was admiring his spoils of war. Suddenly, he realized this creature possessed actual intelligence. The zombies lurking below had evolved, and they had crowned a leader. He told his parents everything he had observed. Since the undead were clearly evolving, based on the variants he had seen so far, he classified them into Stage 1, 2, and 3. Stage 1 zombies were the typical, brainless, early apocalypse type, lacking any intelligence. But Stage 2, zombies were the evolved monsters that slaughtered their neighbors. Their physical abilities were massively upgraded, and they possessed basic problem-solving skills. Then came Stage 3, the intelligent overlords capable of commanding the horde, who could even feel complex emotions. Evolution was clearly their dominant trend. If they weren't wiped out soon, Stage 4 or 5 would surely emerge. This was terrible news. They had lost contact with the government a long time ago. What the outside world had become, he had absolutely no idea. Would anyone ever come to save them? His belief in humanity's ultimate victory began to waver. The zombies below maintained their trap for another week, before finally judging that there was no food left in the area. They all marched off toward the city center. His family waited inside, until the very last zombie had gone. Only then did they finally breathe a sigh of relief. Yet, an overwhelming sense of loneliness crept over him. The world had fallen completely silent, leaving only the 3 of them alive. Noticing his growing gloom, his mother put him in charge of their indoor garden. As he sowed the seeds, it felt like he was nurturing humanity's last hope. Some of their stored potatoes had already sprouted, so he prepared to plant them alongside the veggies. First, he carefully carved out the sprouted eyes, and then he buried them in plastic bottles filled with soil. Once the leaves sprouted, he dug out the roots with the soil. He placed them in larger cardboard shipping boxes to plant them with the other sprouted seeds. This batch of vegetables was fertilized every 20 days. He snipped off any growing flower buds with scissors to keep the plants from getting malnourished. Summer faded to autumn, and winter returned once more. By the time of the 4th fertilization, it was already early January 2023. The other vegetables had already matured, and the pots were taken over by small potatoes. He pulled the entire batch out of the soil. He left a small portion on the kitchen counter, stored another portion in the fridge, and brought the rest inside the bedroom. He jumped straight onto the bed, tossing the potatoes aside and huddled under the blankets to warm up his freezing, shivering body. The charcoal fire in the room burned bright. His parents were in bed watching a downloaded drama, the story reaching its most dramatic winter scenes. Do not easily destroy. Since temperatures plummeted at the start of winter, the family had moved into one room to save charcoal. Awake, they cracked the window to ventilate the room every single hour. Before sleeping, they extinguished the fire and turned on electric blankets. Indeed, except for the main bedroom and the balcony where they grew vegetables, The rest of the apartment was freezing like an icebox. Exactly how low the temperature had dropped this year, they had absolutely no way of checking. But judging purely by their senses, this year felt far colder than any before. Whenever he left the warm, heated room to step into other areas, within just a few steps, his nose and ears felt like they were going to freeze off. It was painfully cold. Today was minor cold, bringing an even deeper freeze. Their local custom called for eating warm laba kanji on this day. But just having kanji was too simple. Winter was the perfect time for mutton, using meat to ward off the deep chill inside. With their current setup, fancy mutton dishes were off the table, so they went with the easiest option, mutton hot pot. His mother had soaked their very last remaining glutinous rice, barley, and green beans, along with red dates on the bedroom table last night. Then, she sliced 2 pounds of mutton into thin pieces, prepping the main course for today's hot pot in advance. Seeing him return, his parents got ready to start cooking. These days, they did all their cooking in the master bedroom. If they used the kitchen, in less than a minute, any water set out for cooking would freeze over with a thin layer of ice. His mother took the soaked ingredients, mixed them with rice and mineral water, and started the rice cooker to brew laba kanji. He had never been a fan of laba kanji. Even during the laba festival last year, he hadn't touched a single bite. But this year was different. Now, every single ingredient in that pot was incredibly precious. 6 months into the zombie apocalypse, they cherished every scrap of food. The kanji was simple enough to make. So next, the whole family began preparing their mutton hot pot feast. He squatted by the trash can, peeling potatoes, while his father went to the fridge's crisper drawer to grab their homegrown scallions, ginger, and garlic. There was cilantro, mushrooms, cabbage, sweet potatoes, and radishes. After bringing everything into the bedroom, he went back for their pre-apocalypse stash. Baby corn they had stockpiled, hot pot meatballs, dipping sauces, frozen tofu, sauerkraut, and the mutton slices his mother prepped yesterday. He washed all the vegetables in a single basin of water, then pulled out their electric pot. He added mineral water, scallions, ginger slices, and red dates. By then, his mother had already finished chopping the veggies. They set everything out, and all three quickly crawled back under their blankets, watching the water slowly bubble and steam rise up. The warm mist felt like a facial spa treatment, making him comfortably drowsy. An episode of Empresses in the Palace was still playing on his phone, but it didn't seem to matter much anymore. It became the background noise to their hot pot dinner. Once the water boiled, his mother tossed in a massive plate of mutton. He quickly followed up, dumping in meatballs and frozen tofu. Before long, the delicious aroma filled the entire room. He grabbed a piece of meat, dipped it in sauce, and stuffed it in his mouth. He was completely speechless for a moment. The first round of meat was devoured by them in no time. He dropped in a second plate, along with slices of potatoes and sweet potatoes. By then, the frozen tofu cooked earlier was finally ready to eat. He dipped it in his sauce, taking small, cautious bites that practically scalded his teeth. His dad then piled some soft, tender cabbage onto his plate. He used his chopsticks to shred it into strips with the sauce. The cabbage literally melted in his mouth. They ate until they were completely drenched in sweat. Finally, he scooped himself a warm bowl of soup. By this point, the broth had absorbed the rich flavor of the meat and the freshness of the veggies, along with the unique tang of the pickled cabbage. Drinking it down, he felt like his very soul was elevated. Once they finished eating, his mother poured the hot broth into a large bowl and set it outside to freeze in the cold. He used that warmth to work out with his dad. He pushed through 30 push-ups, followed by a 15-minute plank, and then 60 mountain climbers. In the past, even a single push-up was a struggle for him, but now, these exercises were nothing to him. That evening, they had laba kanji, skipping any other food to keep their stomachs light. Afterward, his mother looked at the calendar. Only 17 days left until the spring festival, she said. Heavy snow began to fall in the middle of the night. It came down fast and thick, blanketing the earth in a vast, pristine coat of white. At 3 in the morning, near the city center, a massive explosion shattered the silence, waking them instantly. A faint red glow seeped into the sky, painting the pitch-black winter horizon with a fiery hue. He had a terrible feeling that the zombies had evolved again. Ever since that massive blast, the sound of explosions never stopped for the rest of the night. The constant noise kept the family wide awake, so they all just ended up getting out of bed. This time, the commotion was much louder than usual. It dragged on past 9 in the morning before finally quieting down. After eating breakfast, he spoke up quite hesitantly. With an explosion that massive, "The military be here?" His parents stayed silent. Ever since that thought crossed his mind, a seed of hope broke through the soil, taking root deep within his heart. It kept teasing him. making his heart itch with anticipation. But hope is far too precious in the apocalypse. Even as he hoped, he was actually terrified. Terrified that it was all just a wild delusion, but the answer came soon enough. One morning, a week later, 3 heavily armored military vehicles rolled into their compound. Ever since the last zombie evolution, there were no signs of life left inside. His family had also let their guard down, no longer keeping watch at night. The main gate was locked tight, making a harsh screeching noise that woke him up. Peering through the window curtains, he finally spotted the intruders. Once the gate shut, the 4 men who got out quickly climbed back inside, driving toward Building 10 near the north gate. Rubbing his cold hands and stomping his feet, he saw about 12 people step out. 4 of them carried a stretcher inside. Someone was injured. This Lunar New Year felt completely hollow. Half a month ago, this group began living in their compound. Their stockpile of supplies was ridiculously massive. He realized that very day they were bad news. Probably because Jinxiang, Jade, was Q City's only newly developed neighborhood. 6 months into the outbreak, they naturally assumed nobody was living here. A week later, without checking carefully, they started organizing their crew to aggressively loot supplies across the area. Building 10 was the very first target. The barf guy he'd crossed paths with once before. His corpse was tossed straight off the 5th floor, frozen solid into ice. There was no telling how long he'd been dead. The moment he hit the ground, his body shattered into massive chunks. He couldn't bear to look, but a cheerful whistle echoed from below. Clearly, this had become their sick form of entertainment in the apocalypse. They searched, spending a whole day stripping the 5 units of Building 10, and they actually managed to scavenge some food and medicine. He remembered those were leftovers from the rainy days, abandoned by the neighborhood scavenging teams during their earlier runs. But as we watched this group strip everything bare, the final traces of the community's residents were being completely erased. All those grueling nights spent risking their lives for supplies, and every single heart-stopping moment of terror, it was all swept away in an instant. His fingertips went cold with dread. There wasn't even time to mourn for them. He knew that at the speed they were moving, his own home would be next on the chopping block. The moment they discovered that locked stairwell door, it would mean absolute doom for his family. For the entire day, his family survived solely on dry, compressed biscuits, just trying to get by. They didn't even dare burn coal, terrified of leaving any trace. Across the way, Building 10 was brightly lit, with the faint sound of music drifting out. Those outsiders seemed to have already mastered the strength to fight off the zombie horde, showing absolutely none of the dread we'd expect in this apocalypse. Compared to their carefree attitude, the atmosphere in his home was suffocatingly tense. He racked his brain for any resource they could use, but after running through every scenario in his mind, he realized none of it would work. But he refused to just sit there and die. He had fled back to this sanctuary, building this ultimate doomsday bunker for a reason. He was absolutely determined to survive. If the odds weren't in his favor, he would force them to be. Closing his eyes, a deadly plan slowly began to take shape. His doors and windows were incredibly secure, reinforced with the highest grade of bulletproof and blast-resistant materials. Even if that mob used brute force, they could still hold out for 2 hours. But their overall combat power was just too weak. The only weapons they had were cleavers and pliers. Against military-grade weapons, they stood absolutely zero chance. He possessed the strongest shield in the world, but lacked the sharpest spear to fight back. But once a problem is identified, it must be solved. If his own strength wasn't enough, he would borrow external power, like utilizing those zombies that had caused the massive explosion downtown just a few days ago. Soon, his parents fumbled in the dark, tying bedsheets together to make a makeshift rope. He tied one end of the rope around himself and handed the other end to his parents. The window had been shut for so long it was frozen solid. He used all his strength to pry it open bit by bit. The freezing wind outside was bone-chilling. The creaking sound of the window opening echoed dully in the quiet night sky, only to be swallowed by the howling northeast wind. Fortunately, the noise wasn't too loud. He squatted on the window ledge for a full minute, taking his first step before his body could freeze up. He stepped out, standing precariously on the narrow ledge, transitioning completely from indoors to the freezing outdoors. He was so incredibly cold he couldn't even shiver. With no time to adjust to the freezing temperature, he squatted down and grabbed the rope tight. Bit by bit, he let his body hang in the air and slowly descended. The makeshift bedsheet rope let out an agonizing, tooth-gritting creak, but he wasn't afraid at all. In fact, his blood was pumping from the thrill of the adventure. 3 minutes later, the 14th floor was right before his eyes, its bedroom window shattered. He planted his foot firmly on the 14th floor ledge, shielded his face with his arms, and slipped inside. He stepped into a completely ruined bedroom. Dried bloodstains from an old struggle covered the room, though they were barely visible on the dark brown floorboards. he could hardly even recognize this as the home of the woman who had been pushed from the building. He quickly opened the bedroom door, searching for his target. Everything was going much smoother than he had expected. The drone once used to deliver supplies now sat on the dining table, but it was frozen ice cold. Its dusty frame made its functionality uncertain. Next, he found the drone's other accessories. Gathering the items, he returned to the spare bedroom. He tugged the rope twice. The rope quickly shuddered in response. First, he took the drone and charger, tying them to send up. He watched the rope slowly move upward. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. Only then did he feel his back freeze numb. After waiting 2 more minutes, the rope appeared before him again. He skillfully secured it around his body, then stepped outside and shuffled along the edge. Down was easy, but climbing up was hard. It took him 20 grueling minutes to finally make it safely back to the 16th floor. The moment he entered, his mother shut the window, handing him hot ginger soup. He could feel it clearly, burning down his throat and into his stomach. The sudden heat triggered a violent stomach spasm. His mother had already warmed up the master bedroom. He crawled into bed, curling up to soothe his aching body. Staring at the red light on the drone, he felt relieved it was not broken. After drifting off for 3 hours, he finally regained his energy. It was still pitch black, barely 5 a.m. He could not stomach the compressed rations, so he just forced a quick bite. His mother was putting hand warmers on the drone, hoping it would survive the extreme cold. By 5:30, everything was ready. His father secured the phone onto the device and opened the spare bedroom window again. The wind had died down, but darkness lingered. It was completely pitch black. Their drone took off, wobbling into the night. Typically, a standard drone has a flight time of 30 to 50 minutes. Their drone was a DJI model. Subtracting the freezing cold and lack of maintenance, it could conservatively fly for 23 minutes, which meant their drone could only fly for 11 minutes before it had to turn back. This particular line of DJI drones could reach 80 kilometers per hour in zero wind, but they conservatively estimated only 40 kilometers per hour. At that, the drone could only cover 7 kilometers in 11 minutes. After 7 kilometers, they absolutely had to return. But for a small town like Q City, 7 kilometers was more than enough. Their straight-line distance to the city center, only 5 kilometers. The drone's camera broadcasted live footage. Streets were lined with charred, abandoned cars. Shattered glass littered the doorways of looted shops. It glided past one ruined building after another. Everything was swallowed by pitch darkness. Fortunately, this model was equipped with night vision, allowing them to see most of their surroundings. The whole family stared nervously at the screen, clinging to a single sliver of hope. 10 minutes later, his scheduled alarm blared across Q City, echoing through a city that had long been silent. The festive spring festival clashed violently with the dead, empty streets, adding a deeply unsettling, eerie vibe. Watching the live feed on the phone, the expected zombie horde was nowhere to be seen. Cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. His heart began hammering violently in his chest. By now, the drone's battery had dropped to 50%. His father was forced to fly the drone back. Without a doubt, his plan had failed. He had imagined that the noise from the drone would lure the evolved zombies from downtown straight into their neighborhood. They would clash in a brutal fight with the intruders, buying his family precious time to find another way out. But this time, he had attracted absolutely nothing. His theory was completely wrong. Charging the drone would take 4 whole hours. The next flight couldn't happen until 10 a.m. By then, the intruders would already be searching the building. It would be too late. At 5:53 in the morning, the drone landed right on their balcony on schedule. The sky was still pitch black. His mother grabbed the phone to turn off, the alarm set to ring in 7 minutes. Meanwhile, his father brought the drone inside to charge. Outside, the darkness was thick as sludge. Trapped in this heavy, suffocating blackness, he struggled to breathe. Then came 7 a.m. The intruders across the way were starting to wake. The family couldn't sleep a wink after that. His father silently went to reinforce the fire escape. His mother studied how to maximize the use of their sharpened knives. Fortunately, that gang still needed to eat breakfast. By 8 a.m., smoke was rising from across the way. He could only pray they would drag their feet. But the scales of fate tipped in their favor once more. Half an hour later, 2 men in heavy down jackets appeared. They headed straight toward Building 8 behind them. Just as he let out a sigh of relief, 2 more men arrived, laughing and carrying tools. Their target was crystal clear, Building 12, the exact building he was in. The inevitable had finally arrived. He felt his chest vibrating with intense dread. His eardrums pulsed with his racing heartbeat, producing a loud, heavy thudding sound. It grew so loud it drowned out everything else, reverberating deep inside his very skull. Pushing up his numb, cramped body, he tried to retreat into the room to recover. but the indoor air had suddenly grown incredibly thin. He struggled to keep his eyes open, but his vision began to blur and thicken, fading into a dark, incomprehensible green void. Drip. He looked down. His nose was bleeding. He tilted his head back, lifting his arm as his mother quickly washed the blood away. At last, his nosebleed stopped. Heavy thuds echoed from the door downstairs. He lay on the bed, staring blankly at the pale ceiling. Sensing something was wrong, his mother stepped in. She firmly forced a piece into his mouth. A rock-hard piece of frozen chocolate. They said sweets could trigger a rush of dopamine and make him feel happy again. He sucked on the chocolate, tasting absolutely nothing. Surprisingly, his dark mood slowly started lifting. He decided to try again. This was his ultimate gamble. Their family's final struggle before facing total extinction. 90 minutes later, at 10 in the morning, the drone took off from their windowsill right on schedule. The letters SOS were painted boldly on its body. He had scribbled them using his very last marker. Outside, the intruders remained fully focused on looting supplies. They had already reached the 8th floor. Reaching the 16th floor was just a matter of time. This time, the drone glided through the air effortlessly. It zipped quickly through the residential complex and vanished completely from their sight. His hands shook uncontrollably as he silently prayed, hoping the blood and noise would lure a massive zombie horde and deliver a miracle. The live camera feed on his phone was infinitely clearer than during the night. After a minute of flight, his phone began blasting music. This time, he didn't set an alarm. Instead, he built a custom playlist to play music non-stop. To avoid alerting the wrong people, he had recorded a full minute of pure silence, specifically to play during the initial launch phase. Along with these audio adjustments, they shifted their flight path. This time, the drone headed straight toward the east, flying toward the city's other commercial district. In daylight, the streets looked even more desolate. From classic revolutionary anthems to festive holiday marches, the drone blasted songs across the sky. Yet, on the screen, there was still no sign of a single zombie. His heart slowly began to sink. He couldn't understand where all the city's zombies had gone. That earlier explosion in the downtown area, hadn't a war just erupted between humans and zombies? Soon, the drone's 11-minute flight time was up. It was time to bring it home. His father handed the drone controls over to him. He went to reinforce the indoor defenses. He steered the drone, but his heart suddenly sank like ice, absolutely chilled to the bone. The return path was still dead silent. He refused to give up hope. He lowered the drone's altitude, hoping the closer proximity would make more noise. But still, nothing. No humans, no zombies. They had all vanished. Their family of 3 seemed to be the last survivors of Q City. During their time cut off from society, Q City had changed beyond his imagination. A suffocating loneliness enveloped him once more, forcing him to accept the harsh reality. They had truly been abandoned. His vision grew blurry. He forced his eyes open, staring at the screen. The drone kept flying at high speed. As it neared the neighborhood, he guided it down into a hidden patch of grass. It would stay there forever. He closed his eyes, praying silently. Death is the end for everyone. But hope is an unquenchable fire in the heart. If their home was actually breached, he wanted to leave them with as few supplies as possible. The less they got, the better. That drone was too valuable a resource. It could absolutely never fall into their hands. His mother's knife sharpening grew louder, no longer concealed. His father lit a cigarette for the first time in ages. He took off his blood-stained clothes and put on a clean white shirt. They were all making their final preparations. Amidst the harsh screech of the blades and the choking smoke, he opened his eyes and picked up his phone to power it down. The drone's camera feed was still frozen on the neighborhood's dead weeds. Just as he picked up his phone, the screen flickered. A pair of hands appeared, completely free of rot. Their bright red, frostbitten skin practically screamed with life. His eyes went wide. He watched as the stranger picked up the drone. Right after, a face wearing a military cap filled the screen. His mouth was moving, clearly trying to say something. The camera cut, revealing an organized army marching into view. January 17th, 2023. Just 5 days before Lunar New Year, a violent shootout erupted between the intruders and the army. It seemed they were already familiar with each other. Both sides fought with brutal precision, but the National Army held the upper hand. By nightfall, the intruders were already losing ground. For the next 2 days, they still couldn't live normally, surviving solely on bread and compressed rations. By the 4th day, the intruders finally broke. They chose to surrender. A military bugle echoed across the neighborhood. He hid behind the curtains, watching the intruders, one by one, hands on heads, get loaded onto trucks. Heavy snow began to fall outside. The soldiers braved the storm to clear the area. He stared at the military green, moving through the endless white landscape. It felt like spring had finally arrived, radiating a renewed sense of life. He couldn't quite describe the feeling, in his chest tight, while his mother quietly wept. Only then did he realize the overwhelming bittersweetness of being a survivor. The military soon reached their building. The low-level zombies in the hallway were easily neutralized. The family of 3 sat on the living room sofa. For days, they had been too afraid to burn charcoal, wearing thick down jackets by day, relying on electric blankets and heat packs at night. But now, with the threat gone, they finally dared to light the charcoal for warmth. The bedroom's charcoal fire was moved to the living room. For the past 2 weeks, he had watched the outside from behind the living room curtains. His hands were covered in painful, itchy chilblains. Just as his mother wrapped his hands in a warm towel, a heavy knocking suddenly echoed from the fire door outside. They were here. His father stepped up to open the door. He told him and his mother to stay safely inside, then took his sharpened weapon and went out alone. He stood in the elevator lobby to talk with them. He felt a bit dazed. It had been 186 days since the zombie outbreak. They had long since lost all trust in other people. Living through this brutal apocalypse, they knew they could only rely on themselves. The officers outside seemed to have expected this reaction. They calmly accepted the harsh consequences brought by this disaster. Public trust wasn't lost overnight. He couldn't force them to change their minds. Their only option was to restore social order quickly and get everything back on track. Only with faith could the nation find hope. They brought them some news from the outside. This zombie outbreak was a global disaster. Their country was one of the hardest hit. The government had done its best to rescue it. Over in Q City, they cleared the last zombies in the northeast. Right now, only 3 cities in the country remained uncleared. The explosions they had heard at night before were from a joint effort with civilian groups known as Operation Pixiu. The reason their drone failed to attract any zombies was because Q City was already completely cleared. As for those civilian groups, they didn't explain further. But he recalled the weapons and supplies those neighborhood intruders possessed. He knew things were not nearly as simple as they claimed. Yet, for ordinary citizens like them, it was enough. But none of that really mattered. Over the last 6 months, Q City had become a ghost town. The government set up temporary shelters in the capital city of every province. Most of the surviving residents had already relocated there. Since their neighborhood was far from downtown and newly developed, they were placed dead last on the evacuation list. Perhaps because the occupancy rate there was so low, their thermal signature was barely detectable. When the military scanned with thermal drones, they assumed there were no survivors left. At that point, the young soldier outside offered an apology. Hearing the distress in his voice, the father comforted him instead. After a moment, the soldier resumed his story. Those low-flying drones had actually caught their attention long ago. During the second flight earlier that day, the troops spotted a crooked SOS on the family's drone, but they weren't entirely sure if it was a real plea or an enemy trap. Unwilling to give up a chance to save lives, they secretly followed the drone all the way to the neighborhood, waiting for the right moment to act. He pressed against the security door, listening closely, only to hear his father slowly bending the wire open with pliers. The heavy stairwell fire door hadn't been moved in ages, so pushing it open after removing the wire made a harsh, grating screech. For the first time since the zombie outbreak, they were finally opening that door. He heard his father say, "I trust you, and I trust our country." The soldiers outside seemed stunned that he actually opened the door. The father smiled and continued, "It is New Year's Eve. Come have some dumplings." Once New Year's Eve passed, or at 6 a.m. on New Year's Day, the family set off toward the shelter. They packed all the food they could carry, though after 6 months, there was barely anything left. The most valuable things were the seeds they had saved. Word was, the shelter was desperately short of them. A single seed could buy a mountain of supplies. As for the ripe vegetables, they used them for dumplings yesterday. Many hands made quick work of it. Overnight, they completely devoured every single green he had grown. He quietly left the rest behind, keeping a selfish secret. It was his way of securing a backup plan. Living through the end of the world forces an inevitable shift in a person's mindset. Before boarding, he caught the stunned stares of the detained outsiders. They clearly never expected anyone in his compound to still be alive. One particularly fierce-looking thug stared him down with cold, vicious eyes. He didn't know if the man was plotting some future revenge, but none of that mattered to him anymore. Surrounded by so many heavily armed soldiers, he felt a profound, overwhelming sense of safety like never before. On the road to Sector A, the ruined city streets along the way were completely devastated. He closed his eyes, refusing to look. Only when they finally cleared Sector Q did he peer out for one last look. This was the place where he lived. Without stepping outside for 187 days, he quietly hoped it would heal soon. Just as he hoped for all of humanity, the fierce fire of life was burning bright, sweeping across the wasteland like a dragon. Hope is always built on sheer survival. Where there is life, there is hope. And hope brings the light.